Welcome to the Safety Pro Podcast, where we help you manage workplace safety one episode at a time. And now, your very own Safety Pro, Blaine J. Hoffman.
Alrighty, I'm ready for another episode. This one here, we're going to tackle strategic planning, how to establish strategic goals. Now, it doesn't matter if it's safety and health or if it's just business goals, right? This stuff applies. So we're going to go over some basic fundamental strategic planning tactics, okay? So I'll often ask folks about goals or plans they have for their businesses, right? And I'm often surprised at their answers. Most folks will rattle off things they're working on right now that actually have nothing to do with strategic planning. So they usually rattle off a whole bunch of things that they're doing, which if you've got 5, 6, 7 different strategic goals for your business, annual goals and objectives, I'm going to tell you right now that's too many. So a common mistake folks make is to confuse strategic planning with tactical decisions or things that need to be done in the near term, right? So some folks are more strategic and others are more tactical in nature, and I get that. That's okay. The trick here is that you have to be able to be both. You have to think strategically and behave tactically, right? And I'll explain this here if it doesn't make sense. So, let's start with tactical, right? Tactical decisions are those that are made in response to something that is happening right now, often making use of whatever resources you have on hand at the moment. Strategic planning, it's more about developing a general plan of action to achieve a major goal. It's a process by which, established goals are prioritized and resources are identified and or developed in order to achieve those goals. And those resources become the tactical things that you move around to achieve those goals. So, I'm going to have to go back to the tried and true method for developing goals and explain how one might go about doing this. Most of you may have heard of the S.M.A.R.T method of establishing goals. S.M.A.R.T being an acronym, which is S.M.A.R.T. S is specific, M is measurable, A is achievable, R is relevant, T is time-bound. So let's walk through how to set this up using an example from the safety world, which would be the Voluntary Protection Program, VPP. So I've had many clients in the past, they wish to participate in a strategic partnership with Osha in their VPP. So many will tell me that they established a corporate goal of becoming a VPP star site. Well, that's awesome, not a problem. But that's like the football coach claiming that at the beginning of the game, their goal is to win. Sure, but how? What's the strategy? So that's what we're going to begin with. The first letter of the acronym S.M.A.R.T, S, that you begin by being specific. We need to define the lofty goal, also known as the BHAG or Big Hairy Audacious Goal. So obviously we want to be a star site, a VPP star site, right? So what is involved in getting there? For the sake of efficiency, let's just say it's the following. You have to meet the 4 VPP program elements and sub-elements and sustain them for at least 1 year. You also have to meet specific days away restricted or transferred or total case incident rate recording or record keeping requirements, okay, that OSHA sets. You have to submit a VPP application after you do that. It's the third thing you got to do. And then, of course, you've got to go through the on-site audit that OSHA puts you through when they accept your application. So these have to be written to meet the specific requirements of our strategy, that S, right? So maybe it'll sound something like this. 1, we conduct a current state assessment of existing safety and health management systems. So a gap assessment. And you're going to compare that to the VPP minimum requirements, okay? Real simple to do. I used a stoplight, a gap tool for years doing this with clients. Conduct a current state assessment of existing safety and health management systems compared to the VPP minimum requirements. 2, evaluate the past 3 years OSHA record-keeping logs compared to a 3-year average of our industry. 3, we have to write the VPP application citing the findings from our current state gap assessment, how we feel we are meeting or exceeding the minimum VPP requirements. We're going to write that into our application. 4, we're going to prepare for the on-site audit. So each one of these we've written very specifically. Listen to them again. I'm going to just pull out keywords. 1, conduct. 2, evaluate. 3, write. 4, prepare. Conduct a current state assessment. Evaluate past 3 years of our logs. Write the VPP application. 4, prepare for the onsite. So they're very specific. They're action oriented. They drive us to do something. So you can clearly see these goals begin to shape the strategy one must take to achieve the VPP star status. This brings us to the second letter in our acronym of S.M.A.R.T, M, which is measurable. How do we know these things are being done? How can we measure them? We have to define this in order to be able to say that we've achieved them. So for our example, luckily, we have a program manual that gives us minimum program requirements. So it might sound something like this. For number 1, we wanted to conduct a current state assessment of existing safety and health management systems. So we compare existing policies and procedures to the Appendix D of the VPP program checklist that on-site auditors will use. And then we identify gaps to be closed after that assessment is complete. That's it. That's how we measure that. The second action we had to do is we had to evaluate the past 3 years of our Osha logs. So we're going to have to calculate the 3-year average DART and TISR rate according to the BLS industry averages so that we can compare our, each of our 3 years to that 3-year average. Pretty simple. That's how we measure that. And number 3, we write a VPP application. Guess what? For VPP, Osha has an application template that you download and that you could follow. That's how we measure that. We can follow the template to make sure that we've answered every one of the template questions. And finally, we prepare for the Osha on-site assessment. So how do we do this? How do we measure this? Well, we conduct a self-evaluation of facilities and personnel using the on-site auditor's checklist that we can pull right out of the VPP program manual. That's how we're going to measure how prepared we are for the on-site audit. We will conduct a mock audit and score ourselves. That's the measurement. So these measurable items will help determine several things. Whether these are specific enough, whether VPP is achievable in the near future, and how much time is needed to get there. So let's get to the A, which is achievable. This means first, whether they meet the program requirements. So also whether the company has the staffing and or budget to reach the goal, adding to our list, we might see something like this. So number 1, we conduct a current state assessment of existing safety and health management systems. We do this by comparing the existing policies and procedures to the Appendix D of the VPP program checklist that on-site auditors use. Well, how do we know if it's achievable? We identify the gaps that exist that need to be closed before we can move to the next phase. Those gaps will tell us how achievable this is, whether or not it's realistic for us to even pursue this. Okay, and it'll tell us that the time and capital needed to close those gaps. You may discover that comparing your existing policies and procedures to the VPP program checklist, you may discover you've got some major capital expenses that are going to be needed, some investments needed in facilities, infrastructure, or maybe an ARC flash assessment. It could be 6 figures easily for a decent sized facility. And this tells you exactly what you need to do next. Maybe for the second item, you evaluate your past 3 years OSHA record keeping logs. Then you calculate the 3-year average DART and TISR rate, based on your BLS industry averages. And that would get you to the achievable phase here of this acronym. Then you can determine whether or not a rate reduction plan is needed to be developed and in order to continue on. You may discover that each of your 3 years exceeds the 3-year industry average DART and TISR rate. So you're going to need to determine whether or not we can even achieve in a reasonable amount of time a rate reduction plan. So what about writing, and let's say you can get past the first two. Number 3, write the VPP application. You follow the application template format. Well, while doing that, you're going to identify application gaps that you have in the application. You're going to be missing documentation, evidence you're going to need to provide. You can determine whether or not it's achievable to go back and create certain documents, get records of training for consultants that you brought in and maybe you've lost over the last year or 2 years, things like that, okay? You can even take a VPP application workshop and see if it's available by going to a regional or even a national VPP conference. So, that can help you through the application process. That's how you can determine whether or not writing the VPP application following the template is achievable. And what about preparing for the Osha on-site audit, the 4th thing you got to do? You do that by conducting your self-evaluation of facilities and personnel, conducting interviews, using the on-site auditors, Osha on-site auditors checklist. Well, after you're done, you review those results and determine whether or not a change plan, if needed, is achievable, if that's something you can achieve. So let's get to the next letter in the acronym, relevant. Now, relevant could be several things. First, is this overall goal relevant to your business? If you're in an industry that does not qualify for the partnership, well, that's going to be an obvious answer. No, it's not relevant. Now, it may be more subtle than that, right? Many top performing companies simply don't feel they need to participate in VPP, and it places undue burden on staff and resources. Even though they might be a great fit for the program, they may already be benefiting from the actions that they're doing on their own already, right? So something to consider, because it may just, knock your lofty goal right off the whiteboard, right? So is this goal relevant? Time-bound, the last letter in the acronym. This is just as important. You have to determine how long it may take, also knocking your lofty goal off the whiteboard, should you discover you have neither the time, money, resources at all to achieve this goal. You may say that it's just not enough time. It's going to be 5-10 years down the road. So that's too lofty. You need to then pare this goal down into specific things that came out of your initial discovery phase of determining whether or not this goal of achieving VPP meets the S.M.A.R.T acronym, okay? If it's going to take 10 years, you need to break this down into smaller chunks. If it's going to take 5 years, you may need to break this down into smaller chunks, right? You need to realistically estimate how long, given your current resources, it will take to complete each item you laid out. So maybe it reads something like this. Number 1, we conduct a current state assessment of the existing safety and health management system. We compare our existing policies and procedures to the Appendix D of the VPP program checklist that on-site auditors use. From that, we can identify the gaps to be closed after the assessment is complete. Then we can determine the timeline and budget for repairs, new equipment, guarding, training, based on those gaps, right? That's going to tell us whether or not it's, what timeline we're looking at, whether or not we can even do this, if it's achievable, if it's even relevant for us right now. So you can get to a lot of this information by really focusing each of these steps needed to be achieved in order to get to that lofty goal of, we want a VPP star flag. So let's look at the second one. So we evaluate the past 3 years of our OSHA record-keeping logs. Well, we do this by calculating a 3-year average DART and TISR rate that the Bureau of Labor Statistics published for our industry. We determine whether or not a rate reduction plan needs to be developed. And then once we do that, we determine whether the BLS rate for the current year will impact a 3-year total average, or if another 12-month cycle must pass. So remember, what you do is you take at least 1 out of the 3 previous full years of DART and TISR rate that you have. has to be lower than the 3-year average that the BLS has. So you may have to go another year of reducing your injuries and illnesses before you can apply. So this will tell you whether or not you have, what kind of timeline you're looking at. So if you get past all that, let's say you're looking at number 3, we have to write a VPP application. Well, we identify a VPP application workshop availability. We determine the cost for travel, enrollment, joining the VPP PA and going to a Region 5 or Region 1 or Region 3 conference, stuff like that. You identify the staff that's qualified to assist in the application development, or if maybe you need to hire an outside consultant to help us with that. That's all going to tell you, what kind of resources and time you're looking at in just getting the application out. And let's say you get past all that and we go to the last one, which is prepare for the Osha on-site audit. So obviously we conduct a self-evaluation of our facilities and personnel interviews using the on-site auditor's checklist. From that, we determine major gaps, assign areas of responsibility. We conduct training as identified during the self-eval and interviews. We determine timeline and budget for any training that's needed, identify trainers that we need to bring in. Maybe to train a trainer we've got to have for internal folks so that they can then do training. We can review results of this checklist and develop a change plan as necessary. And then from there you can again go right back to following the VPP application template and prepare for your on-site audit. Obviously, this is just for illustration purposes, and I just touched on it. What could be a very deep topic. I mean, this could be an 18 to 24, 36-month process preparing for VPP. But you can see how following the S.M.A.R.T method, instead of saying, I think we should pursue VPP, how you can break that down into, okay, what are the things that we need to do to get there? How, they have to be specific, measurable, they have to be achievable, they got to be relevant to our business needs, relevant to our industry, relevant to us, and they have to have they have to be timely. We have to be able to nail down how long this will take. So that S.M.A.R.T method can really help us nail it down what we need, okay, before running headlong into a lofty goal. It does several other things as well following this method. It provides the longer range plan for those visionaries, those types in the organization that they all think they're Steve Jobs, and it will also lay down those important tactical activities that are needed in order to get there, satisfying the firefighters in the company that just need stuff to do, the punch list folks. So following this method will satisfy both the strategic thinkers, big strategists, as well as the tactical operators in your organization. So remember, don't confuse strategic planning with tactics. Stay focused, start early, and using this method will help you get there if it's done the right way. Of course, as always, if you need help, have questions, you can just contact me through the podcast. There's a link to there. I love getting your emails and reading them and answering questions. So, maybe go to a peer, maybe another company that's been there that's good at strategic planning, or a subject matter expert. So whatever it is, have a plan. That's your winning strategy. So be sure to post your comments. Hey, subscribe to the podcast if you haven't already. Leave a ranking and review. It really does help me improve the podcast. It helps others find it as well. The more reviews we have, good, bad, or indifferent, doesn't matter. I need the feedback so that I can hit on topics that you want to hear, and add value to this. So, I just ran through the S.M.A.R.T method of strategic goals and objectives. Remember, if a goal is too lofty and too broad, follow that acronym. Break it down into the specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, time-bound pieces that need to be completed in order to get there. It will bring focus to those goals and objectives, and they will look great on paper. So things like our goal is 0 accidents. Same thing. Really? That goes without saying. You don't need to write that down. That is sort of a given. But what are the things that you can do that will ultimately result in one day 0 accidents, 0 injuries? Those are what you need to write down and start paring down using this SMART method. So things like that. Think about your goals and objectives. Go look at them on the poster board in the lobby or on the whiteboard, or open that email and look to make sure that they aren't too lofty. They're not these big, hairy, audacious goals. Bring some gravity to these goals and objectives, and then start laying out the strategies needed to achieve those goals. So once again, thanks for listening, and until next time, be safe.
Thanks for listening to the Safety Pro Podcast. Be sure to visit www.consulthoffman.com for articles and information about safety services. To have Blaine read your question on the show, email him at customerservice@consulthoffman.com. Be sure to have 2 F's and 2 N's on Hoffman. Until next time, be safe.